I'm Jon Deane, the Deputy Director for Startup Education. I have an amazing group of people here on the stage with me. I'm going to do a quick introduction of each of them and give you a little bit of a set of objectives for the day. Lizzie Choi joined Summit Public Schools 6 years ago, had been a math teacher, an innovation project manager as Summit transformed to a personalized learning model, and is now the leader of the Summit Basecamp program. Basecamp is a free program that provides the tools, resources, and support needed to bring personalized learning to schools across the country. Lizzie received a BA in Public Policy from Stanford and an MA from the Stanford Teacher Ed program. Next we have Phyllis Lockett, and I don't think most of you need an introduction to here, but Phyllis is the CEO of Leap Innovations, Chicago-based education technology hub, advances personalized learning to prepare students for 21st century skills. Leap helps to identify, pilot, and research and expand the use of innovative teaching and learning technology tools from pre-K to early college. There's a lot more I could say about Phyllis, but one thing I love is that Phyllis was born on Chicago's South Side, is a graduate of the Chicago public school system, and both of her parents were Chicago public school teachers. Next we have David Vinca, founder of eSpark and the Chief Executive Officer. David has a passion for helping students grow academically through modern technology, great teaching, and community. Before eSpark, he spent 4 years teaching using computer simulations and 4 years as a management consultant. David has a BS from Penn State and an MBA from the University of Chicago. And at the end of the row here, we have Melissa Zaikos, the founder and CEO of Intrinsic Schools. Prior to working with Intrinsic, Melissa led the Pershing Network, a network of schools in the southwest communities of Chicago. And from 2005 to 2011, Melissa was the Chief Area Officer for the AMP schools, overseeing more than 100 schools within CPS. She has an MBA from the Harvard Business School and is a member of the Broad Fellowship for Education Leaders and the Broad Residency in Urban Education. Okay, so this is our group here. It's going to enlighten you for the rest of the afternoon. For the next 45 minutes, we're going to give you a little bit of a background, more than a basic background on personalized learning. We want you to walk away with a framework for understanding what we're talking about, what we think the power of personalized learning is, ways in which we think different models can scale, and really how funders and others in the education community can actually support making that vision possible. So we're going to be diving into that. I'm going to ask all of you guys to start. Can you just share an anecdote about how you've seen technology move student outcomes in a unique way? Just take 1 or 2 minutes to kind of introduce yourself with an anecdote there. We can start with you, Lizzie. That sounds good.
I think as a teacher, everyone has like that student where you like care so deeply about them, but you know they came in with a ton of holes, you know, in their experience. And I have a student who just was warm and dear to my heart, who Jon also knows. And every single year we used to sit down with him and his family and go over how he needed to start owning his learning if he was going to make it to college. And he always said he wanted to in September. And then in December, he was not going to office hours, and he wasn't turning in his homework, and so forth and so forth. We decided to kind of launch this goal setting, this long-term goal setting in our platform. And he was like doing research on how he's doing and his colleges that he wanted to go to, and he just realized his GPA and what kind of GPA he needed to get into the school that he wanted to. And you know, was getting very close to graduation, or he's a senior at that point, and so I wasn't in the classroom at that time, but he found me and he like showed me where he is and where he wants to be, and he said, I did the calculations, I think I can get it, and if I do this and this and this, I think I'm really ready now to finally commit and make this happen. And it was like this really amazing moment where you can use technology to help students realize that they need to continue to be motivated to meet the goals that they want.
So my story is, Leap Innovations is an innovation hub here in Chicago where we're really trying to bridge innovation and education. And one of the core programs we have is a pilot network, where we're piloting technologies from all over the world to pilot in Chicago public schools with personalized learning practice to see what works. So my favorite story is actually a student at Spencer Elementary School in the Austin community. Austin participated in our beta pilot. We were just trying to figure out, okay, how does this pilot network work? And we piloted a product called Myon, which is a digital library that, based on a student's Lexile score, the student takes a quick assessment, and it's kind of like Pandora, basically, for reading. So based on your likes and dislikes and kind of where you are, you get a tailored, personalized library. And this student was just changed his whole thinking and being around reading. And when we went to visit the school, the principal said, "What in the world has happened? You are not going to believe how much our kids are reading." This kid ended up reading over 60 books and found a love for soccer that he didn't even know. I mean, he doesn't even play soccer in Austin. And it's just a passion for, just being exposed to the world that he never would have had, and exposed to improving his reading because a whole world was opened up to him that, he didn't know existed.
So I'll share an anecdote that really influenced me in the trajectory of our organization, eSpark Learning. I was really inspired by the work of the KIPP Charter School Network. I had read about their incredible success going into low-income communities and getting students on a path to college that wouldn't otherwise be. And so I went to kind of observe KIPP Chicago, and I met Kate Mazurek, who's a master teacher there, doing just incredible work. And I asked her what her #1 challenge was. I wasn't a former teacher, so I didn't really understand kind of the modern challenge of a teacher. And she said, "Well, I've got students in my classroom that are 4 or 5 grade levels behind, and I've got other students that are 2 grade levels ahead, and differentiating my instruction for every student is really, really hard, and I'm really challenged by it." I could tell she had been working really, really hard at this problem. And to me, it felt, as I started to unpack that and look at the data behind the student learning needs in that classroom, I started to realize that is an impossible task, that she was really fighting this battle that was impossible, given the methods at her disposal, which were overhead projectors, chalkboards, and it just really seemed prehistoric in terms of the technology. So I'm really excited about the challenge to use technology to really help teachers individualize or personalize learning for students in school. And I think when we do that, we can see these outsized effects on student achievement.
I'm Melissa from Intrinsic, and we have our oldest kids this year are juniors. So we've done a lot with using technology to individualize math instruction. And we have a real philosophy about how teachers still have to lead the instruction, but you need to figure out how to be able to group and regroup students so that students can be going at their own pace. So we do double period for everybody, and what we've learned is that if we match the standards in a specific way, some kids can get 2 courses done in 1 year, etc. So from the outcome perspective, we just had 2 juniors just take the BC calculus exam this year because they've been able to accelerate through the math so quickly, and they're doing that in a room where other kids are also learning like general algebra, algebra 2, pre-calculus, etc. So we think we've built a system that allows students to continue to move forward and really get high outcomes for those kids that are ready.
Thanks for those stories, guys. It's a great way to get us started. I'd love to dive in a little bit more and set some more context. And so, Phyllis, I'm going to ask you guys have done a lot of work around kind of setting a framework for personalized learning is. And I'd love you to just share with the group, what is personalized learning? How is it different from some of the other buzzwords out there?
Yes, so there's a lot of misnomers about blended learning, personalized learning. What really is it? And David's work inspired us to even get started, quite frankly, as we thought about LEAP, because there weren't enough Chicago Public Schools students getting access to these types of opportunities that Melissa's has helped to create and David has helped to create with eSpark. But in essence, personalized learning is really about centering the learning experience around the student. We have, since the turn of the century, been forcing kids into a one-size-fits-all system and forcing one educator to teach 30 kids, and in an average Chicago Public School classroom has a grade span of about five grade spans, right? Really super hard. And so the notion around personalizing learning, we spend quite a bit of time with the National Montessori folks, learning scientists, national experts across the country, and came up with 4 core tenets. The first is that it has to be learner-focused, meaning that the education experience is tailored around the skills, interests, and needs of the student, and every student has a learner pathway, has their own pathway. For those of you all in education, every kid has an IEP, right? Secondly, that it has to be learner demonstrated so that the learning can occur at the student's own pace and demonstration of mastery, not by seat time, not by the grade level. When the student is ready to move, they can move to the next level and they're not held back. The third core tenet is that it's learner-led, that there's choice and there's agency in the learning experience. The student is empowered to choose the modalities that work best for their learning. And fourth, that is learner connected. That is connected through accredited pathways outside the four walls of the classroom. So that for us is personalized learning.
Thanks, Phyllis. Melissa, we know that models of what personalized learning looks like vary, and we'll discuss more about that later. But let's make this tangible. Can you walk the audience through what a day in the life of an intrinsic student looks like?
Sure. John told me he was going to ask this question, and I was trying to think about how to help everybody visualize this. So if you'll indulge me, I'll go relatively quickly, but this morning I caught teachers as they were coming in, and I literally wrote a narrative of one of our students from Friday. So I'll just go through that. I also let you know that I picked Friday because we happen to have some pretty cool stuff going on in the building, so it's not always this great, but Friday was a pretty special day for us. So I'll just start off, and I'm going to read it in the voice of the student. At 8:15, I grabbed breakfast in the barn, and then at 8:30, I joined this Jamboard, 14 other freshman girls, who checks to see if we have our Chromebooks charged and if we're in full uniform. I'm in softball gear because we have a game tonight. As a group, we spend 10 minutes talking about summer programs before the bell rings. My first class is algebra, so I go to see Ms. Clifford. There are 64 students in my class and 3 teachers. The math room is a big space we call a pod, which has flexible areas for small group instruction, discussion, collaboration, and independent work. We spend the first 45 minutes with Ms. Clifford and 12 other students in a small group about factoring polynomials. I then move on to independent work on IXL, that's a tech program, where I practice online for 20 minutes and then watch a video on flipped math to preview Monday's lesson. Last, I head to the collaborative area to work on our ACT-aligned problems of the week with my small group. Intrinsic's on a block schedule. I have math every day, math and English every day, and every other subject every other day. Because today is an A day, I have PE and we're doing circuit training. On B days, I have creative art, where I just finished my mini graffiti mural. After PE, I have lunch and then world studies. We've been studying what it means to be an upstander, bystander, and victim in order to learn how events in history impact our world today. Today, we have Mr. Samuel Lieberman visiting. He's the son of a Holocaust survivor and was born in a displaced persons camp in Berlin in 1948. We read an essay he wrote as a 12-year-old student explaining how his mother survived Auschwitz and kept his sister alive. Mr. Lieberman took questions from us, talked about finding courage. It was amazing to talk to him in person. Afterwards, I worked in a small group where we created posters on an issue today, and we picked LGBT transgender rights. If today were B Day, I would have had science where we were dissecting baby sharks. It's pretty cool, but the smell's really bad. My last period is English. I start the period in book club with 4 classmates. We are reading All the Light I Have Not Seen, which our group picked first on the unit list. Not every student's reading the same book. We have a packet prepared by our teachers, which we plan out how many pages we read at night, answer questions about the reading with evidence from the text, and rate ourselves on the quality of our conversation. Ms. Haywood circulates from group to group and stamps our papers if we are on track. After 30 minutes, I move to a small group with Mr. Podell. We're working on poetry analysis and have to take a prose paragraph and insert line breaks to turn it into a poem and then read it aloud. For the last 30 minutes, I work independently on IXL, where I'm practicing Latin roots. It's a beautiful day, so at 3:45 in advisory, we convince Ms. Jambour to let us go outside and we continue the morning's discussion. At 4 o'clock, I load the bus for the softball game. So the key things that I want you to note from this is that very personalized. So students are in a big room with 60 students, 3 teachers. They're moving through that and they're doing some things that are personalized to them, some things that are in a group. We've also learned year over year that paper still matters, discussions with kids still matter. So all these things, tech is a tool to get to where you want to go, but it's just one tool. And we believe, I think all of us, that creating the holistic experience for kids is really important. You want real science labs, you want speakers, discussions, hands-on work, but the tech can allow us to better help the teachers get where they need to go in terms of being able to push the students and giving them more resources.
Can I build on that for a second?
Please.
Because when I was first launching LEAP and I was describing it to my dad, who was a teacher, he's like, this isn't new. We've been differentiating learning for years. And it's like, yeah, you're right, Dad, but, really great teachers have been doing this for a long, long time, and it's really, really hard. It is about the pedagogy of creating this learning experience. The technology, we believe, is the fuel that's going to help us scale it. So you think about the data that an educator can get every single day to understand where every student is, and then they can tailor their learning experience. You think about the engagement and of these adaptive tools that are enabling students to push further and push further. But at the core, it is about teaching and learning. So that technology is just a tool. And the other misnomer in terms of blended learning, because you know a lot about that, is just because you have technology in a classroom and you're blending learning, that is not personalized. A lot of people get that confused.
And what Melissa just described there on a Friday, I know you said it's not a typical day for you, but I think probably most of us in the room could agree that if we had a day like that, we'd probably be at the end of the day pretty satisfied, right, for most things we see. So I'm going to leave it with you, Melissa, for one more. You spent a lot of years in CPS, working in the school district here before launching Intrinsic. What were you trying to solve for when you started Intrinsic? I know you didn't set out to just use technology to make things different. What was it that you were trying to solve for?
I think really we're trying to create a replicable and sustainable model that helps everybody else, right? So it's like, how do we figure out how we take students coming in at all different levels, make the job doable for the adults to get out of the box results for kids. And so we talk a lot about, we need to be able to use data, we need to have the tech help us personalize for students. And then the part that I think we're all sort of growing into is I guess the lingo right now is agency, but how are we helping kids be able to understand and articulate what they're doing and why, and then have a real sense of identity and place in the world, like where does this fit for me as I move forward? So it's really about building the systems that we can share for others about how you use tech to make the job doable for everybody.
Lizzie, I'll pass it over to you. Summit Public Schools in California and Washington is already a fairly well-regarded charter network, but yet made a lot of changes over the last few years. So can you talk a little bit about what drove Summit to put so much effort into developing and implementing new technology in the personalized learning model?
I think we were finally honest that we weren't delivering on the promise that we set out to deliver on. You know, we stood in front of families and said, we are going to get your students to college. 97% of our students got into college. We're going to get you through. And yet, you know, the data started coming back, and it looked like the persistence data was that about maybe 55% of our students were going to graduate within 6 years, which is like the national kind of metric for whether or not a student will graduate. And I stood in front of those families and said, like, I promise you something, and we want you to do that. And then so to actually be honest as an organization and say we want to reopen up the conversation was incredible, right? In terms of like being able to like rethink things and like, hey, instead of everyone like secretly and quietly doing that redesign because you know you're not delivering in your classroom for your four walls, why don't instead like we put dozens of people's minds together and then rethink redesign. And so for us, even though, you know, in a lot of the metrics that are used in this country, it seemed as though we're doing right by students, we felt like actually we were pretty far from where we needed to be. And when we called all of the students and the families, because we knew who those students were that didn't finish, they told us two things. They told us one, yes, I passed AP classes and I took a rigorous course, you know, all throughout high school, and yet, like, there were some fundamental holes that I never really filled, even though my teachers were helping to make sure that I was able to do AP level work. So I had to do some remediation courses, and being able to actually make it through that track in college is incredibly difficult in California. The second thing was like, you guys loved us too much. You dragged us across the finish line, and so, you know, you called home when I didn't go to office hours and this and that, but then when you left, and we all felt so proud, right, that like I got into college, I was all alone. So I didn't know what to do when I didn't have my teachers like yelling at me down the hallway and doing all of these other things. And so we knew what we had to solve for was exactly what Melissa was saying, that agency and that ability to self-direct their own learning. And so even if we feel good about the fact that you've gotten into college, if you can't do it without us, then we haven't actually delivered on what we need to do. So that's what we set out to say.
Thanks. So I think we'd all agree that not all personalized learning environments are created equal, and so some are more effective than others. David, I'd love to just get your thoughts on, so what are the core tenets of what an effective PL looks like, and then maybe some of the common pitfalls you've seen as well?
I'm a strange person to ask on that one, because Phyllis hadn't gotten around to her definition of personalized learning, and I saw the term being bastardized and being used to say technology in schools, we've got personalized learning. we got iPads in our schools, we're personalizing, and it felt, the term started to become shallow to me, and it felt like really misdirected. Even though in our mission statement was personalized learning, about a year and a half ago I took it out. I think if Phyllis had gotten there a little sooner, we'll probably have it there. I kind of just wordsmithed it to be student-centric, because it's very easy to conflate kind of technology and the method with kind of the outcome. And so I guess really effective learning for students has a great outcome, and the way I think about outcomes for personalized learning, and I kind of mimic the notion that technology is the tool, I think the ultimate outcome we're seeking for students is self-actualization. Many of you have got a great job and career, and you've had a great ability to kind of push yourself to a career and kind of realize your dreams. And most CPS students, most public school students don't get that opportunity. So I think our ultimate aim is self-actualization in life, and college is a really important signal of that. Working backward from there, I think in school you have to feel successful. And so I think great learning, like Ken said today, has students excited about learning and feeling really successful with it. And that confidence is the vitamin for achievement. And so our work in personalized learning takes great care to make sure we're measuring and understanding our students feeling successful at this work. So that's at maybe the 6-month or semester horizon. And then in the moment, I think personalized learning feels, there's a feeling of joy and the feeling of in the zone. You know, when you're tackling some really difficult problem that you have in your work, you kind of lose track of time and you get absorbed in that work. I think that's what it feels like for students to be in a personalized learning environment where it's not too difficult to them, where they're feeling like they're not successful and they won't be able to do it, and it's not too easy, but they're really, really engaged at their zone of proximal development. So as I think about what effective personalized learning means, I think about those 3 time periods, and are we really helping students kind of get to self-actualization?
I appreciate that you said I'm not the right one to do it, and actually that makes you a perfect one to talk about it because you can see it from that perspective. Would love to hear just a little more follow-up on, you said some of the pitfalls, especially from your perspective with the technology, and where technology, people often say it's personalized learning just because it's tech-enabled. Where do you see some of the pitfalls?
There's 2 big, giant gaps in the workplace that I see. One is that we follow the algorithm. There's some computer scientist behind the scenes that's going to decide what Melissa should learn tomorrow in class. And to forget that Melissa is a human and that she should have some agency and some control and some choice in that. And so I think at eSpark we are big fans of data-driven personalized learning, so don't get me wrong, that's an important factor, but there's humans at the other end of that screen, and we should really help them develop agency and more ownership of that personalized learning experience. So I think that's one where a lot of software products just want to follow the algorithm and tell you exactly what you need on this conceptual map and give you the right thing at the right time. And I think that's a little too algorithmic. I think the other big mistake is that, and Melissa hinted at it, I think there's this renewed movement of agency, which is like, why did the student care to learn fractions? Like, who cares, right? And I think we kind of focus on the skill and the standardized test, and not like the relevance to the student. And so instead of just learning that particular skill for this particular test, why does it matter to you in your life? And how would that skill help you with something you actually care about? So I think those are the 2 mistakes. I guess algorithmically too much, and almost like focus on the test and not why the student should care about it.
The math teacher in me gets really sad when you say, why should we care about that? But I have to agree with you. So I'll just kind of sit with that and let it move on. Phyllis, I think it would be great if we could, we talked about a few different kind of models, and we're seeing variation in what this looks like in schools. I think one of the things that you were doing a lot of at LEAP is figuring out how to measure efficacy of what's going on. And I'd love you to talk a little bit about the current state of measuring efficacy of models and tools.
Yeah, so part of the reason we created the pilot network is because, when I first met David, in fact, the first time I got exposure to this work was at KIPP, and I was looking at a student using eSpark before I even met you. And I looked, she was a 4th grader in North Lawndale, and I looked over her shoulder and I was like, you're in 4th grade, you're doing algebra. Did you? And she's like, I am? And it was like the coolest thing. And the teacher was like, yeah, isn't it great? Because I'm not even teaching algebra yet. So when I met Dave, so I'm like, man, how can we get more of this like across Chicago public schools? And so when I met David, he talked a lot about the challenges of just getting in. And KIPP kind of said, okay, great, you kept bugging April Global, said, okay, go after school and just go, leave us alone. And then they realized what a great product this was. And then in talking to educators and our principals, it's like a Wild West. So many claims, so many tech products that are out there, they don't even know where to start. So we've created this pilot network where schools, for a 18-month program with professional development and piloting curated tools that we've identified, we can assess what works. And in our first year of our pilot network, we're happy, we're thrilled about some of the emerging results. We actually, with the control group from Chicago Public Schools, saw about a 45% reduction in the achievement gap between free and reduced lunch students and non-free and reduced lunch students. Reduced it by 78% for African American students and closed it for Latino students. So early, but really phenomenal at the student level data. Really good indication that these practices of personalized learning coupled with technology can really transform, or has the promise to transform education in the way.
That's amazing. So, Melissa, hearing some of these early results that we're seeing in the pilot network, first of all, that's also just really incredible to think about those numbers for a minute. We have a room full of people who are thinking about, from their perspective, from being a funder or someone else in the community, what they can be looking at to understand this. And Phyllis has given us a little insight to some of the early results. What should discerning funders be looking for when they're looking at a PL model or thinking about how to see the impact of what's going on in your schools?
John and I talked about this a little before. It's kind of a hard question because the truth is that like short-term measures may not be the right thing. So what we're all trying to figure out is like high-performing traditional charters have figured out how to get kids into college, and I think Lizzie spoke about that. So the question is, how are we getting kids or students to and through? And there's early indicators that we can look at. So clearly we're held to the same accountability measures as everybody else at CPS around our basic academic data, so test scores, do we run a well-run school, et cetera. All of those things need to be at the same level or better than everybody else. So we look for ACT growth, NWA growth, we look at the University of Chicago's survey on how we're doing, but that doesn't really tell you like what's working in terms of are we gonna get students further ahead. So I mean, I think some of it is unfortunately like anecdotal or observational. When you talk to a student, can they talk about what I'm doing and why? We're all looking at different survey measures. Can we survey students to see if their perceptions of themselves as a learner are changing? I'm becoming a huge proponent for like, we need to look exactly at student work. So like, what does students' actual authentic writing look like, that kind of stuff. But I guess I encourage the funders a little bit to like, have conversations with us, figure out what it is that can convince you without asking for interim measures that don't make any sense. Because like there's a lot of stuff, like we're trying to correlate, for instance, with our NWA growth. Think Through Math is a program that we think is a really good program, and students have been on it this year. We're trying to correlate like how many lessons they have completed with their success rate to our NWA growth and all that kind of stuff. But it's early, and there's a whole bunch of other things at play. So I guess what I'm asking is people should keep the big picture, ask the true academic questions, look at the overall observational stuff, and don't see it as a short-term silver bullet, because I think this is a long-term game.
So John, you at startup support personalized learning, so how do you think about investments? What do you look for? What are the leading indicators? How do you continue to fund things?
Yeah, it's never fair for a funder to ask a question about what we should do and then you'd like ask back. No, I think, what's that?
I can answer.
You could answer, I love it, Phyllis. I think you heard a little bit from Phyllis about those early returns and hearing from Melissa about the longer term returns. I think what we see as a role that we need to be able to play is give people space to figure out both early returns and some of those longer outcomes. Really, we have an opportunity now to deeply invest in R&D, to be able to give people room to figure out what's actually going on. This is a space where we don't actually know how to find the short-term indicators for those longer-term outcomes, but we have really good ideas about what that might take. So how can we invest big in our R&D to learn quickly with what's going on, to allow our entrepreneurs to take much bigger bets to make some of these changes, and then really to take not a 2-year view towards getting the outcomes we want to be. Think about this as a 20, 30, maybe even longer term process to really create the systemic change that we need. Those are some of the things that we think about and are trying to make some investments towards those ends.
Yeah, thank you for saying that, because when we first started Leap, this is new. This is an emerging field. We are learning, and it's still very much at the early stages. And it's hard when a donor who wants to see immediate returns. It's hard to invest in the R&D. And honestly, we've been able to because LEAP has been able to get established and grow so quickly because we got funding from the Gates Foundation, the Dell Foundation, a lot of the national folks who were who were willing to take the bet. So I'd say, although VIA is a little unnerving, be willing to take the bet and help to invest in some of this early stage work that can transform education.
Speaking of big bets, and work, Lizzie, you and Summit have made a bet that other schools, if you build this model and figure out how to replicate, other schools will want to take advantage of what you've done. We'd love to hear a little bit about what it's looked like to continually assess your model and allow other schools to sort of jump in and adopt what you've done and then to customize on top of it, and kind of the leap that's taken for you as an organization.
Yeah, I definitely see it as a cycle that we're learning from our base camp school partners, and then hopefully we're sharing more work from Summit. And what I would say is, number one, it's actually not a model. We're definitely agreeing to philosophical alignment and vision, but schedules, instructional minutes, all of that actually looks different, staffing models and so forth. It's just that when we started building the tool, we only had one organization using it, right? And so we needed other people who are willing to say, yup, we're going to align, we're going to have common language, common standards, so forth, so that we can collaborate and learn together. But that means that you need to trust, right? That we're going to do this together. And so I think a lot of what it has looked like for us is to have that honest partnership conversation with all of our schools who are willing to say, we're different than you in this way. We are a rural school. We are an urban district. We're this and this. But we want to be able to bring this to other schools that look like us. So can we be the leaders on that front? And so very much that's been the conversation we're having. And so we're actually going down a pathway right now where we're starting to build profiles out of what does it look like to implement personalized learning for a school, fill in the blank. And then trying to follow them and write case studies, and then what were the iterations that they did, and what didn't work for them, and what were the changes we had to make inside the platform to be able to accommodate for that. And so I think what we always have to tell everyone is there's no way we can continue to do our work if other people who are not us don't join us, right? But I also think that there need to be enough people who are willing to be those different people to kind of build that community connection.
David, let's take a step back and think big picture. What's the vision for this sector, really? Is personalized learning for everyone?
Yeah, I guess I'll kind of debate the premise a little bit, just because I think personalized learning has so many meanings. I don't think we should conflate the kind of method with the outcome. And I think it's really important to kind of define the outcome and then build your case backwards. I really think that it's student-centric learning, I believe, is for all learners. And I think our vision is to help, at least at eSpark, we want to achieve 1 million more students graduating from college that wouldn't otherwise graduate in the next few years. And I think that kind of a systemic change would be a really inspiring outcome. And I think the personalized learning, the method, the tool, even the platform, should all be just things that we can discard at the service of this kind of ultimate outcome.
So to that end of not conflating outcomes in the process to it, I would love a couple of you guys to respond. Maybe I'll leave it open and you can pick. Where has the philanthropic community helped keep those separate, or keep the right focus there, and where has it hindered in terms of maybe conflating those, as David mentioned? We don't have to say names or anyone in particular, but maybe as a broad, so the audience can get a little sense of where that might help or actions that might be holding people back.
Can I do one for one?
Please.
Yeah. So convening people together. It's so hard when you're in the weeds and in the work to know that a day away with colleagues from different organizations is going to be better for your strategy. And we know that in our brains, but it's really hard to pull away when the parents are calling and you need to do all of the day-to-day work. And so I would say having the space and then finding connections has been incredible, because the work is hard. The work is hard. If someone tells you that the answer is easy, they're wrong. Or at least tell me what the easy answer is, and I would love to figure out if it's easy, but it's hard, and everyone doubts whether, are we making the right bet? But when you hear the results from other people and you have the space to zoom out and realize that even though change is hard, it's worthwhile, then you are willing to take bigger and bigger bets. I think where it's been hard is as we've been trying to encourage change and encourage innovation, there's been this idea that everyone needs to create something, and everyone needs to have their own spin, and everyone needs to do something different, and like to be an innovator and a creator is the ultimate goal, versus let's actually figure out how to collectively do something together. And so I think there's actually very much a status kind of point of view from the funding world, where if you create first versus adopt something, then that's better. And I for sure think that we need to have different models out there, and we need to have different points of view, but no need for there to be 3,000 different approaches for everything, right? Because then we won't actually learn faster. And so I do think now that people are interested in the design work, it's time to figure out then how do we actually maybe start kind of coalescing and becoming more similar alongside there.
So at the risk of being duplicitous, right? Because I've started 2 nonprofit organizations in education in the city. It's like, I think donors can really help create leverage. And we have all these myriad of education organizations that are passionate or trying to change the world or trying to change the paradigm. And I think what happens is we end up kind of operating in silos sometimes. And I think, using your philanthropy to drive collaboration, partnerships and leverage would be huge. Because I think we'll all get there if we run together a lot faster than we can apart.
Can I just take one? Because I've got one more on that. I agree with the convening, absolutely. I agree with helping us with best practices, and those best practices can come from like more next-gen schools or traditional schools. There's a ton that I take from people that have been doing things in a traditional way that's really helpful to my school. The one caution I would say that I'm pretty adamant about from a funding standpoint is while I think it's really helpful to develop frameworks and things where we're looking at what is blended learning or what makes a good next-gen school develop, with agency and all this stuff, I really worry about people putting out, here's the 6 tenets of what it takes to be a school like this, and then people as they're starting schools try to do it all at once, right? So my first year, I had spent 9 years at CPS. I was very theoretical. I understood all this stuff intellectually, and I'd managed at a big level, but I hadn't had to run a lunchroom, right? And so when it came in, we're trying to do everything all at once, and it's it just doesn't work that way. So I feel don't force theoretical frameworks on people. Let the pragmatic people that understand how schools really work tell you how we can sequence things to get it done, as opposed to asking for all now. Because I think you could really have a bunch of people start things that are just disasters.
Can I maybe push on that a little bit? Because I agree that it can be hard to do whole scale, which is why for base camp we're grade level teams, one size team, unless there's a ton of energy behind that. I also think though that we're in a place right now where there's a ton of piloting that happens and leads to nowhere.
Agreed.
Right? And so I think I'd be curious from your perspective, what do you think if you were to do it again, what was the right grade size, or how would you approach it?
Yeah, I don't think it doesn't mean that it's not all whole school, but it could mean when I talk to colleagues here, they're okay, you gotta get school culture right first. And so we thought, okay, we've got all these students and we wanna give them X amount of independent time, and we're going to give them this freedom, etc. And for us, that just the first year didn't really work. I mean, we recovered and we figured it out, but by the second year, we put in a whole lot of structure, and then we started to figure out now once we have this base, how are we going to do the innovation? So some of it depends. It definitely I think you can do a lot of whole school stuff with younger kids first. I also believe I can be pushed. I'm incredibly cautious while being innovative now, but I think that people can start with some of these big frameworks, and if they don't get some of the basics down of culture and how are you going to observe and provide feedback for teachers, and some of the stuff that we learned from charter or good CPS schools 101, if you don't have that down, those are basics that have to happen first.
So here's some themes really from this group about giving them space and time, giving them the chance to set these outcomes and look long term, and also just making sure that we're really thoughtful about how to run schools. I think those are some important takeaways that we're running through. We have time for probably just about 2 questions from the audience, and she's going to bring a microphone down here, and we'll make sure that you get that so we can hear it. We'll try to just maybe have one person take each of these questions, and then we can ask more after.
So, question for Phyllis, maybe John, you too. Pilot programs. So we all love them. We like to experiment. We like to try new things. We like to see what works and what doesn't work. But parents don't like that so much because it's their kids you're experimenting with. And some stuff's going to work and some stuff is not going to work. And the movement has actually been criticized a lot by parents as our kids are these experimental people. How do you address that, and how do you think about it from your own personal perspective, and how do you deal with it in communicating with parents who have that, I think, relatively legitimate question?
Well, sure. So Melissa is absolutely right. Like, unless a school has the baseline, culture, effectiveness, practice in place, forget it. You're not going to pilot our pilot network. Once schools enter, it is a sea change. We have the school that CSCS was built in, part of the Distinctive Schools Network, changed a few classrooms. We're piloting it just a couple of classrooms at a time. But they took the furniture out, and the teachers showed up the first, because they're creating all these different learning modalities, and the parents were like, what happened? You took all the furniture out, what are you doing to our kids? And so it took them a bit, like, to kind of talk to the parents around how we're really focusing on learning for your student and going deeper with your student, with your child, in very deliberate ways than we were not able to do before. So trust us. And now the parents are they're really the biggest champions at that school board, and Brian can talk to that. But it is a cultural shift, honestly, and something that you do have to bring parents along, and also talk to parents about the types of technologies they should be using at home, how they can get more visibility on where their students are. So we're getting the buy-in, but you definitely have to bring parents along. It's not this experimental or a Christmas tree where you're throwing all this technology at kids and thinking it's going to do anything.
One more back there.
Hi. So I was wondering, how can we increase the number of ideas that are tested over time? There's a lot of ideas in education, and some work, some don't. But is it possible to really accelerate that particular variable?
So can I unpack that question a little bit? Talk me through why you want to increase the number of ideas being tested. Like, what is the gain for the field there?
So the gain would be that often it's hard to see an idea tested in an environment like with an actual live classroom in which you can kind of see how effective it is. So you might have like a dozen different ideas about how to improve a particular education in third grade classroom for like ELA or something. But you might just be really constrained by just resources or just time that you can spend to try out each one. So you have to just randomly pick one often, or just bias towards one, and then just try it out. So it seems like it would be, if it was really cheap to test ideas, it would really help overall.
So we don't have a time for a really long answer here. I think you might want to ask it at a short.
Yeah, we're piloting for free. I mean, that's to some degree. Like that's the whole point of this is trying and really giving. And part of innovation is giving the schools and the educators a space to learn and fail. I mean, I know that sounds challenging when you're talking about students, but you've got to give folks the opportunity to try different things. So we're not going to break the paradigm. And so that's exactly why we created this opportunity for piloting and testing different approaches safely, so we can learn what works and how to scale it quickly. That's the idea.
So just because we're going to run out of time, I want to give everyone a chance to just maybe one last thought. If you had something, one piece of advice or actionable that you wanted people to leave the room with about how they could help the field better realize sort of the promise of personalized learning, we'll do a quick whip round of advice, and then we'll call it. Want to start, Melissa?
Actually, no, you start.
I don't buy, so I think John asked it to be controversial. I'll leave with a controversial statement. I don't buy this, like, we can't measure it to the long term. I really love the idea of short cycles, short cycle measurement. I think that's one of the things that Phyllis is bringing into the sector, which is like, let's not wait for, so I pitched East Park to superintendents, and they're like, great, in 5 years, we're gonna evaluate whether or not this helped the kids or not. And it feels like crazy to me that like we can't have shorter cycles within a few weeks and months and even a year to know whether or not this is really going to move the needle on important measures. So I really love the idea of short cycle learning, and the measurements aren't going to be perfect, but I really think that like the notion that we have to kind of wait for some long-term thing to work out is misguided, and in software it does help you. You can measure things like daily, weekly, monthly, but I think that same approach of like being impatient around the measurement is really helpful for the sector.
Okay, so I'll add into that one because this is where I differ a little bit. I absolutely believe we can learn whether or not kids are gaining skills quickly. So hands down, totally, and I think we should do that. What I'm saying is like the big picture is the question we haven't figured out of exactly what are the college completion skills and just habits that students need to be able to have, and I think there's a large group in the field trying to figure that out, and that to me is a long-term game.
Who's gonna get the last word here? I don't know.
Go for it.
You're up next, Lizzie.
I think there's a huge difference between enabling teachers with teaching and school redesign. And I think we often conflate the two. And I think when you place bets on teacher tools for individual schools, you're gonna get redefined classrooms. If you place bets on school redesign, you're gonna get redesigned systems. And so I think as you're deciding where to place bets and where you're placing your funding, I think it's important to know, what are the downstream implications of that, and those two things I think are both powerful, but lead to really different end results.
I'd say come out and see some of the models. We have touched about 70 schools in Chicago, and it's extraordinary what's happening. We just kind of went around the city and gave grant awards to 7 schools last week that are really transforming their models, and these are charters and traditional schools that are really breaking the paradigm. So come out and see what's going on right in your backyard. It's great stuff happening here.
I don't think I can say it any better than that. So if you guys would join me in thanking them.